Hi, I'm Jason Pace, Executive Director of the University of Washington Bothel's Digital Future Lab. The DFL is an interactive media research and development studio and also a commercial game production studio. We work almost entirely with undergraduate students. We usually have about 30 to 50 at any given time working on multiple projects, both research and commercial game dev. And the students come from all across campus. They're not just from game development programs. They're from our STEM programs, from all over arts and sciences. And we intentionally recruit teams to maximize difference. We have an incredibly high diversity profile that we're all very proud of in the lab, probably one of the most diverse game development studios or interactive media development studios in the industry. It would be very difficult to identify a dominant majority of any group coming from our students, also our staff. And we are very focused, and have been for the last several years, on investigating the impact that intentionally maximizing difference and diversity has on teams, both from a productivity standpoint to an overall cultural standpoint. I've been spending a lot of time over the last year really investigating the current state of the union in the tech industry because we keep hearing over and over again the diversity crisis that exists. Several weeks ago, there was a story in the news about Facebook, for example, dealing with employees who were defacing Black Lives Matter slogans on the company walls in spite of a directive from Mark Zuckerberg, for example. We've also learned that out of 5,500 or so Facebook employees, only 81 of them have identified as Black. And this is something that is not limited to Facebook. This is pervasive throughout the entire industry. We continue hearing that technology specifically has a very difficult time attracting and retaining women and people of color. And so we start asking why that is. And with all of the focus, especially from these younger companies, with all of the focus on diversity initiatives and all of the training that's out there, what exactly is happening that continues decade after decade, keeping us from really experiencing the benefits of diversity and being able to recruit and retain a really diverse workforce in this industry? And as I've been doing work both in the lab and looking at what's happening currently in industry, it seems to be a difference between what I call reactive diversity and what you could refer to as proactive or transformative diversity, and certainly that's how the lab looks at it. Reactive diversity is fairly typical for the state of the union today in the industry. Reactive diversity is based around learning a set of competencies so that you can avoid punitive consequences. So, for example, if you're an employee, it's all about going to HR trainings or taking online training or going to a day-long seminar to learn how to respectfully treat people so you don't get in trouble. If you're a corporation, a lot of these programs, frankly, are implemented to prevent liability exposure and liability issues. This is a very protective and anti-punitive consequence approach to diversity, and as a result, over time, it becomes increasingly burdensome both to the organization and to the employee, because what happens is we get an ever-growing list of things that you must do and things that you must not do in order to avoid these punitive consequences, or to appear to be at one with the prevailing sentiment of the culture at the time. And interestingly, this is not how diversity actually works in the real world. It's not about learning all of the things you can and can't do in order to truly value diversity. And in order, I think, to move into a place where we're no longer just reactively trying to fill gaps. We need more people of color, or we need more women, or, somebody has just published a news story about something our employees did or said that was unfortunate. We need to begin teaching companies and teaching ourselves and our employees that diversity makes better products. As it turns out, the more diverse and the more different your team members are and your constituency is, the more exciting ideas you have. When you have lots of different brains focused on problems, you get lots of different answers. When you have largely the same kind of brain focused on problems and challenges and ideas, you get largely the same answers, which is true. And so we see right now, for example, happening in Silicon Valley, there is this notion of brogrammers, the 27 largely white male programmer or technical person or marketer person who has come from this very similar background, the same kinds of schools, the same kinds of programs, programs. And in order to get through the door in these startups, and frankly in some of these larger companies as well, there's this notion of culture fit or talent bar, that you must fit the culture and you must meet the talent bar in order to get your foot through the door. And people who are in the position of hiring for these teams say, it's a tragedy that we don't have more women or people of color or people who have different backgrounds who meet our talent bar. And that's, of course, why we can't ever seem to hire them. And then conversely, when we do make efforts to outreach and bring in more women or more people of color or more people from non-traditional backgrounds, people start getting very uncomfortable about this notion of quotas and lowering the talent bar in order just to get more bodies through the door. Well, as it turns out, interestingly enough, talent bar and culture fit are very loaded terms, and they're typically coded language for we want people who are just like us. In the world of industry, when you're hiring for positions, a talent bar is probably a spectrum that looks like this. And there are all different kinds of skills, talents, and abilities that can contribute meaningfully to the organization that exists on this spectrum. Everywhere from extreme empathy and excellent communication skills to very highly technical, detailed abilities because you came out of a top 10 computer software engineering program, for example. Now, interestingly, when we talk about hiring for talent, generally we have constricted that wide spectrum down to something about this wide. And we're saying these are the talents we need to succeed. And as it turns out, these talents were identified and determined as the most valuable by a fairly homogeneous group of people, and they are inordinately weighted in favor of typically white men who come from very similar programs and backgrounds. And so, of course, it's a Herculean task to find other kinds of people who will fit this very narrow spectrum of a talent bar. But what happens if we start expanding this spectrum and we say, well, in actuality, there are many different kinds of intelligences and talents and passions and skills that would be able to meaningfully contribute to these product development organizations. Some of them may not even have college degrees. It's fascinating to me when we started bringing people into the lab from all over campus, and not just women and people of color, but we reached out to different neuroprofiles as well, atypical neuroprofiles, people on the autistic spectrum, the autism spectrum, people with ADHD, and different kinds of atypical neuroprofiles, different kinds of physical abilities. We found that in order for us to work together effectively, we had to all develop exceptional empathy and excellent communication skills. And as a result, 3 years later, the undergraduate students who work in the lab and who have worked in the lab for a year are exceptionally strong communicators. And of course, they've been able to pick up many of the skills from this part of the spectrum that they might not have had, that might have prevented them from coming into this kind of organization had we been using Talent Bar as it currently exists as a way to screen out people. So we expand this notion of Talent Bar to include a much wider part of this spectrum. We start valuing other kinds of skills and recognizing them as able to meaningfully contribute to the development efforts that we have. And we've seen a couple different things. We've seen an exceptional jump in our overall collaborative ability and productivity as a studio. We are built almost entirely with undergraduate students, and we have a very robust commercial pipeline going on now that is actually getting high quality products to market, which is fairly unusual for an undergraduate program. And yet also, we're seeing the kinds of ideas that we develop are fundamentally different. I have students working in program management who had absolutely no technical skills when they came in, but they were very empathic and empathetic. They had different kinds of brains, and as they developed project management and program management skills, sometimes it took them a while to come up to speed, but virtually all of them have over time. They bring completely new perspectives to that discipline and that job. Similarly with our artists and designers and other kinds of the test folks that we have. The assistant director of the lab, who is also the lead producer or executive producer of the studio, had absolutely no technical experience. Her name is Aina Braxton. She'll be joining me in future videos. Her background was law, economics, and public policy. She had no idea that she wanted to work in tech, although she was fascinated by it. And she also has a performance background and a musical background. So we met years ago and we hit it off instantly. And if I was hiring for Talent Bar, there is no way I would have taken a chance on her. Unless maybe I was like, oh, she is a woman, she is a person of color, I must bring her on to increase my diversity profile, which probably would have been a mistake. However, I expanded my notion of Talent Bar, and I was able to say this is someone who has an entire suite of skills, abilities, and talents that are very atypical but are very interesting potentially to the kind of creative work that we do. Let's see what happens. So she joined the team. She's incredibly smart, very driven, and very motivated. The first year was very much a learning experience, as it is for everyone. Her ramp-up time was possibly a little longer than if she would have come out of a technical program. But she is now an incredibly well-rounded and very strong technical program manager and producer. She's capable of leading and mentoring a team. Because she has a very different perspective than many people who've come into these positions before, she brings very unique insights into the table, into the product development process. We are able to push the boundaries of the work that we do in ways that we might not be able to push them if we continued hiring that same very narrow band of culture fit and Talent Bar. And indeed, we've applied this same spectrum logic, widening the spectrum, to all of the students that we recruit into the lab, and we have had overwhelming success, both at building a healthy, robust culture based on inclusion, representation, and respect, and also creating really magnificent work that I'm not sure we would have been able to create had we had the same kind of brain on the same very narrow spectrum applying itself to these problems. So I am writing a series of companion pieces on this approach to diversity. I call it transformative diversity, versus what's typical in the industry today, which I believe is more of a reactive diversity, which, as I mentioned earlier, exists to prevent punitive consequences or to fill a deficit. Please look me up at LinkedIn. My name is Jason Pace, University of Washington Bothell Digital Future Lab. I'm always happy to connect with people who are interested in diversity and working in the industry. Also, stay tuned for more video logs. This is the very first in a series of possibly bi-weekly video logs. We'll be having students from the studio talk. I'll be talking some more about the work we do. We won't always be focusing these on diversity. Sometimes we'll talk about the product development work that we're doing or some of the research projects that we have. And we're hoping to really start a conversation about what maximizing for difference means, what diversity means, and what inclusive and representative approaches to team building and organization building are. Thanks very much for listening, and do check out the Digital Future Lab website as well. There will be a link right here momentarily, and please, thanks very much.